These kind of individuals intensify what should not be intensified. Their anger is always disproportionate to the trigger. A person who is angry, argumentative, miserable, moody, has an inability to control their emotions. There's a mismanagement of anger. There's inappropriateness at the core of who they are. What would you title this person? If you had to be a psychologist for just a minute, how would you diagnose them? What would you call them? I'm sure you probably would lean towards what most of us would lean towards, which is bipolar disorder. But the reality is, not every person who struggles with anger or has problems with managing their emotions has bipolar disorder. There's something known as the high conflict person, and that is the individual who tends to get into conflict not in one relationship, not in two relationships, but multiple relationships and with multiple people. According to the High Conflict Institute, these kind of individuals are lethal. They shift the blame. There's no accountability. And if you're going to be a part of a relationship with somebody like this, you have to understand that the problem isn't you. My name is Tamara. I am in private practice and I am internationally and board certified in trauma therapy. I see children, teens, and families, but I also see adults who are struggling with life transitions, grief, and loss. Let's go ahead and jump in. Anytime I have to deal with somebody who has a high conflict personality, it's something that I dread, because I know that somewhere in our conversation, we're going to either butt heads, we're going to clash a little bit, we're going to disagree, or something else is going to happen that's going to make our communication difficult. Somebody with a high conflict personality has a pattern of high emotions. The intensity is high and the duration is often unmanaged. They don't have the internal mechanisms needed to not only control their behavior, but also to say, I'm over this anger. Let's move on. Let's forgive each other. Let's apologize, right? Let's move on together in a positive way. Most individuals with a high conflict personality have trouble doing that. Also, and I should probably mention that most individuals with a high conflict personality come from intergenerational continuity of high conflict. Basically what that means is that there's been a continuation of high conflict personalities within the family. It's a family thing often, and sometimes if it's not all biological, then sometimes it's environmental. An example of that would be, let's say your father screams. He has always screamed and yelled. He's angry. He's so angry that the neighbors could hear him screaming. He gets offended very easily. He gets hurt. His feelings are hurt very easily. It's difficult to have a natural conversation with your father. And if things don't go his way, you're going to know it. The whole neighborhood's going to know it. And the police may have to be called. So let's say this is your father. This is his high conflict personality. Okay. So let's say that you're dealing with this, and all you know to do is kind of stay quiet, derail the conversation, or try to utilize the gray rock method, thanks to Dr. Ramani, or use some other clinical tools that you've heard about online. That's all you can do, right? These high conflict parents often have had high conflict relationship with their parents, their boss, the neighbors, and maybe their friends as well. But here's where the continuity of intergenerational high conflict personalities tend to operate, right? They've watched the behavior in previous generations, right? And so now here he is in a younger generation, and he's perpetuating that same anger. So it can be biological, and it can also be generational, and it can also be environmental. You know, I think it's important too that you understand that a high conflict personality will often shift the blame and make it your fault. You have to keep in mind as much as you can that you are not to blame. This is who they are. This is how they resolve things. This is how they intimidate. This is how they get what they want. A high conflict personality often goes up against people and things without any ability to process things any ability to put themselves in your shoes, so show empathy. They also have an inability to accept responsibility for their own behaviors. It takes two to be in a relationship. It also takes two to tango, right? And it also takes two to argue. So let's say that you're in an argument, for example, with your sister. She's always been the kind of person who yells, screams, slams doors. She's passive aggressive. She's outwardly aggressive. She's got some covert narcissism going on under the surface. She's very competitive, and she's always been high strung. Let's say you get into an argument with her, for example. It's going to be really difficult for you to say, this is what you did wrong to hurt me, because number one, she's going to be offended. Number two, there's going to be an even bigger argument. And number three, she probably will either take all her anger out on you, like you've completely just lost all respect, and or she's going to go around in the family saying bad things about you, twisting the story and trying to justify her reaction to you. It can get really ugly. You're also going to see this kind of a sister, for example, shift the blame. And she may shift the blame by bringing in other people and making you look a certain way in front of them, or talking about you behind your back to them, which kind of causes other family members to want to address you about something. It can be a really big triangle of conflict. But a sister who has a high conflict personality, they're going to start yelling and screaming, may push the chair at the table, say, I'm never coming to dinner with you ever again. Don't ever talk to me. Don't call me. Don't reach out to me on social media. Don't do anything that's going to involve me, because I want nothing to do with you ever again. That is a high conflict personality. Now, you would think it would stop there, right? Not necessarily. A person with a high conflict personality is likely to leave that conversation at a restaurant, leave you behind, get in the car, call somebody that she's used to gossiping with or talking with, and then they're going to have this kind of back and forth conversation about you. And so then it becomes almost like a fest, right? Like this party that everybody gets together to be a part of so that they can talk about you and what you did wrong and what you said and shouldn't have said. And sometimes in these kind of families, family members can kind of group together, not only in support of your sister, for example, but because they too are high conflict. So now we're talking about a high conflict family. And unfortunately, being the product of a family like this can not only wear your mind down and your heart, but it can also confuse you about who you really are. I once had a client come to me, I'm going to say about 5 or 6 years ago. And, he was the greatest kid. He was 17, going off to college. And he came from a very high conflict family. And here's what he came to me with. He says, Miss Tamara, I'm struggling because I don't know if I have anger issues. I don't know what's wrong with me. Then he broke down in tears and he said, I just don't want to be this way. I don't want to be so angry and explosive and just filled with rage, And I said, I completely understand that. And my goal was to give him some anger management treatments and to teach him healthy coping skills. But as we went along in his treatment and he invited different family members in, I could see why he was very angry and full of rage. And it wasn't because he had bipolar disorder, It wasn't because he was a high conflict person. It was because he grew up in a family full of people who are high conflict. There was always a fight, always yelling, always intimidation. There was always something. And the only way that he knew to survive in that family is to become a yeller as well, to slam doors, to be passive aggressive, to do all of those different things that he learned growing up. And so that's the environmental piece of the puzzle that you want to be aware of. How you want to ask yourself, how did my environment impact how I am now reacting and how I use anger and how I get my point across when I'm angry? And so this was this young man. So that's something you gotta stay on top of. So what kind of conflicts are there? Well, let me just name a couple of them that you may have seen in the workplace. I know you know some people in the workplace who are high conflict, and here's how it typically shows. The first characteristic that you may see in your place of employment is something we call task conflict. And that means, we're having a little bit of differences of point of view on how to accomplish an objective, how to accomplish a task. And so because of that, we're clashing, right? Maybe you and that business partner over there are clashing, right? Task conflict, because you can't figure out what step needs to go first, because we both have different viewpoints. The other kind of conflict that may happen in the workplace is what's called process conflict. And that means we're fighting and disagreeing because we don't know how to get something done. It's hard to get something done as a team when we're disagreeing. And the other one is relationship conflict. And that's just kind of this interpersonal conflict. I don't get along with people at my job or vice versa because they're high conflict. All they want to do is fight, yell, scream, and get rage out. Now, these are in the workplace. Research suggests that you're going to find these personalities in the workplace, so be ready for it. Let me also highlight 2 high conflict personalities and what they look like. The first thing that you're likely to see is blame. There's no accountability, none whatsoever. The other thing is intense anger and rage. There's often a misdiagnosis of bipolar disorder or intermittent explosive disorder. Here it is on the screen. There's also black and white thinking or polarized thinking, which is it's my way or the highway kind of thinking, right? We're going to do things my way or I'm going to flip out. I'm not going to be, flexible with you. You're going to have to give me everything I want so that I don't flip out. You're also likely to see no compromising. There's no ability to compromise. That's the way I should put that. None whatsoever. They're not flexible. These people are very inflexible. They're rigid, right? They may try to destroy opportunities that you have, experiences that you have, relationships that you have. They tend to feel attacked in everything that is done around them, even if it's not done specifically to them. They take it as a personal thing. Everything is personal to them. And this is a high conflict person. So what's likely to happen to you? I know you're interested in that. So let's talk about that for a second. Being involved in a high conflict family or in a situation where there's a high conflict person, you are likely to experience impairment and social role functioning. And here's what that means. We all have a social role that we play. I tend to be rather laid back, calm, cool, collected, and thoughtful. I'm constantly observing my environment. You may be very humorous, free-spirited, if you will. You make people feel comfortable and welcomed, right? That's your social role. And so if you're dealing with somebody in your family who is a high conflict personality, you can begin to kind of collapse or shut down or give up on being who you are, because that high conflict person has an ability to make you feel that something's wrong with you. And a high conflict person will do that. They will flip things and say, you're the reason why. And so then you take that burden and you go to other relationships in your life. And the first thing that can come to your mind if there's a social role impairment is I am to blame. There's a problem with me. The next thing that's likely to happen is internalizing or externalizing behaviors. Internalizing behaviors or symptoms would be depression, anxiety, fear of abandonment, any kind of panic symptoms, for example, fight or flight symptoms. Every time you have to deal with a high conflict person or anytime you have to confront somebody about something, you may start experiencing internalizing symptoms, anxiety, depression, all of those things. Externalizing behaviors would be slamming doors, throwing things, kicking and screaming, yelling, just being very full of rage, not knowing how to control yourself, or there's a high conflict family, right? It's going to rub off on you. It's environmental. There's also high conflict divorces and relationships that you could find yourself in. You may find yourself attracted to people who tend to have a certain personality, but on the flip side of that good personality is that high conflict personality, and that is probably the side that's going to cause the divorce or the breakup in the relationship. There's also what we call parent-child high conflict as well. The relationship between the parent and the child is high conflict, and so you may have a very high conflict personality or disposition with your parent, which can make the relationship really difficult. A high conflict personality or family dynamic breaks down healthy communication. You shut down, you don't want to talk, you don't want to open your mind to things, you don't want to tell people what you feel, you don't want to tell people what you think, you don't want to process anything, you just want to move on. You're also going to experience self-blame and shame and guilt, right? A high conflict person has a way of flipping out on the spot that it can make you feel like you've done something terribly wrong. I went into a Starbucks one time. It was a really hot summer day. I thought before I go to the office, I'm going to stop at Starbucks. I'm going to get me a coffee and just take it easy in there for a little bit and head to work. I'm sitting there drinking my coffee, kind of looking through some documents, just kind of trying to calm myself down. And next thing I know, a guy who was waiting on his coffee goes up to a girl at the counter area where you go and pick up your Starbucks drinks. Well, he went up there and he's like, I didn't order this drink. What do you think this is? And he, hits his drink off the counter there. And the girl is saying, oh, I'm not the one who made your drink, sir. How long ago did you order it? And he's, cursing and using all kind of alphabets at her. And he, screams and yells at the top of his lungs, and then he brings up some political thing that Starbucks was involved in years ago, and then he goes out the door, kicks the door open, goes to his car, he screams outside. Very, very, very reactive. And she had a summer job. She was shaking, crying. And she said he comes in there every month with that disposition. And I talked to her for a good hour. And this poor girl, not only was she raised in a family that was high conflict, but she just got out of a relationship with a man who was high conflict. And now she's dealing with a person who's high conflict personality right at Starbucks. It was the most embarrassing thing I had ever witnessed in public, Imagine how you would feel if you saw that at Starbucks. That's an example of a high conflict personality. And you may sit there feeling like, what did I do, right? Huge question mark over the top of your head. Check out these videos right here, guys. These videos will kind of give you an idea of what this looks like. Thank you so much for being with me. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you want to get more videos like this. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.